we are in this wonderful context of the Casina Pio IV, a house that was built by the Pope Pius IV. He then lived in here, and later another pope gave it to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences that exists for the last 500 years. It's by far the most prestigious Academy of Sciences in the world. It has counted so many Nobel Prizes. Galileo was here, Stephen Hawking was here. This is the place where the Catholic Church and science communicate. Today we are here to explore how contemporary neuroscience, how the breakthrough discoveries that have been made for the last 30 years, mainly inspired by Viktor Frankl, are dramatically changing our approach to education, to health, to mindset, to culture. We will see how in our daily life we can embed these new discoveries of neuroscience to live a life that is more corresponding to our nature, how we can empower ourselves, how we can instill a culture of peace, culture of abundance, culture of cooperation. We will have Dr. Joe Dispenza, who is a global star in vulgarizing, in putting into action the recent discoveries of neuroscience, and we will have Professor Venceslo Vial, who is a professor of theology and spirituality. Out of this beautiful dialogue that we will have together, we will see how every day can bring peace to us, can bring abundance to us. Father Vences, Dr. Joe, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon in this beautiful context of Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It will not be the first time someone famous is coming here, and we are so grateful in the name of the Foundation Clementi that you're both here. So we promised each other that we would have some fun. And so I was wondering, and that would be my first question to both of you. As you know, the Clementi Foundation is working here in the Pontifical Academy of Sciences at finding ways to give a new impetus to culture, to provide more unity, to provide more peace, and contribute with concrete action to more abundance. So I have one question. Beyond the beautiful scenery that I think both of you know here, why did you come here? Why did you accept the invitation?
I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. I think it's a time in history to know how. And anytime there's an opportunity for us to engage in a mindset of understanding how to take principles and practices and philosophy and theory and apply them to our lives in some way to make, in some way, a difference in a person's life, I'm very interested in coming. So the conversations that we've had so far have been really rich in understanding that there are ways that actually can strengthen cultures. And the way cultures are strengthened is by individuals, by people. So if you inform people with right information and you give them the tools to use it, the outcome hopefully is to create a better culture. So I'm here for that.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, I am here mainly because something that for me was very important reading your work, really, is the importance that you give to the attitude of the person. No? So one person can change himself or herself and then can change the world. So for me, the attitude is very important because in many situations of our life, we can't change the environment. We can't change the problems that we have. We can't change our health many times or the problems in society, in the world. But we can always change our own attitude. And changing our attitude, as you say, in other words, can change the world in which we live.
Yes. And I think our attitude is really primarily based on how we think and how we feel. So if you think certain thoughts, you turn on certain circuits in your brain to produce certain chemicals for you to feel a certain way. If you have an insecure thought, in a matter of seconds, you feel insecure. The challenge is the brain is always monitoring the body state. So the moment you feel insecure, you generate more corresponding thoughts equal to the way you're feeling. So we think the way we feel and we feel the way we think, and attitudes are what we call a state of being, because how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So you can have a good attitude in the morning and a bad attitude in the afternoon. So attitudes are shortened states of being. If you keep thinking and feeling over and over again, and you keep repeating it, an attitude becomes a belief. And the repetition of thinking the same way hardwires the brain, and the repetition of feeling the same way conditions the body subconsciously into a certain state. So most beliefs then become subconscious states of being. Whether it's beliefs about money, it's beliefs about God, if it's beliefs about health, it really, primarily they're subconscious states of being. So teaching people that they can actually change their attitude, change the way they think and feel, change their beliefs, possibly can change their health and ultimately change the way they see their life.
And then the belief will drive the meaning they give to things, right? You were talking right now about the environment. That belief that one has built, reinforcing these feelings, will search for triggers in reality to give a meaning, and that will repeat that loop you're talking about, right? The meaning becomes the belief, or the belief becomes the meaning. Right?
Yes, and I also think that there could be a belief that we're not even aware of subconsciously, that we need something in our outer world to make us feel good or make us feel, in certain cases, feel bad. So when things go well in our life, we say, I have a good attitude because my environment is good. And when things are not great in our environment, we feel bad or we suffer. So in a sense, then, if our environment is controlling the way we feel and the way we think, anything that controls the way we feel and the way we think, we are victims to. So then what if then you could have challenges in your environment and teach people how to change their response emotionally to the condition in their environment, which can change their belief or their thought about whatever it is that's causing them to think and feel that way. The challenge is the stronger the emotional response that we have to some environmental condition, the more we pay attention to it. So the way we change that is we have to change our emotional states, and that's really the greatest challenge.
And talking about this, wouldn't it be, that's my next question to both of you, you know, that we're talking about environment. So somewhat we talking also about accessing reality. And we know that the emotional state with which we approach reality is the result of the meaning we've given to it. And what if people would simply, in order to access reality correctly, would condition themselves to have gratitude, to see things as they are and not for what they are not, right? This morning, someone was late at an appointment I had. You have the choice. Or you say, this person is not there. And then you start setting up a whole set of disempowering belief. And that would make you upset because it's not fair that the person is not there and I'm wasting my time and never again and so on. And the anger grows up, right? Or you look at what there is. Instead of seeing at the absence of person, having your brain focusing on what there is not, on absence of reality. And what there is that you are there, sitting in good health, maybe in a very beautiful place, having a coffee, finally some time to write a message to a friend that you didn't answer for a long time and so on. And all of a sudden you start blessing your friend who is late at the appointment because it provides you more abundance, right? And that person would have looked this way, would in fact have looked at what there is and not having his brain focused on what there is not. And doing so, the meaning becomes empowering again, and doing so with gratitude, you therefore access reality. You access what there is, all the good that is around us. And from that perspective, perhaps it's maybe more of a metaphysical question, but I tend to believe that metaphysical question joins reality. Everything can be seen as a good that is given there for you to grow, to give yourself, to train your brain to be even more present, be even more there. And with, once more, gratitude, you elevate your state, And from that elevated state, you start seeing what there is.
When you can change yourself and your own attitude, you can change also the others, no? And you can see different things by different aspects. As you say, you can see the good in other person, the sacred that every person has inside. That is very interesting, no? But the meaning itself, as we were speaking about meaning, is something also that you can find outside yourself, in an objective world that is not yourself. For example, the meaning of your suffering. You can help a lot yourself and your body with all the techniques that you explained very well, no? But this also has a special meaning outside yourself. The meaning that is, for many people in the world, is the meaning, for example, of the cross, of the Jesus in the cross, without speaking about theology, but this can give you a light, a very special light of meaning in your life. So if you are disturbed in some way with other, because he's late or she is late, you can think, well, this is my little cross today. And we can go in a different way, with a different attitude inside, change ourselves and trying to change others with love, with affection. That is also very interesting. So I think that it's interesting to think in meaning also in something that is outside yourself, as a vanishing point, as Frankl used to explain. No? So some great meaning that give meaning for other little meaning that you have, or little senses that you have in your whole life, in many moments of your life. No?
Yes, I agree. From my perspective, what I understand is the brain is a record of the past.
Always?
For the most part, the brain is a memory bank of everything we've learned and experienced to this moment. It's a reflection of our outer environment. So, in a sense, most people are viewing life through a memory. So reality becomes a memory. So at the same time, the end product of any experience chemically is called an emotion. So you're sitting waiting for your friend, and all of a sudden your thought is they're disrespecting me because they're late. Never mind that they may have been in traffic, or their son or daughter had an injury, but we go to a predictable future. We kind of fill in reality based on what we've learned in the past. So we're looking at reality, for the most part, through the lens of the past. The moment you become emotionally involved in the fact that your friend is late, you're viewing reality literally from the past, from the known. If you were conscious that those emotions actually don't serve you, justified or not, those emotions actually can make you sick, then you have to decide, is this moment really worth me making myself sick? What would be an alternative? If I could change my emotional state to love or to gratitude, we see reality through a different lens, because you can't feel angry if you're feeling grateful. So then, as difficult as it may seem in the moment, you still have a choice. So the moment you feel gratitude, or the moment you change your attitude about it, then the body is no longer being tormented emotionally. And of course, then that causes you to think of possibilities. Oh, maybe they're late because there was traffic, or something happened. I have time, it's a beautiful day. And I reframe my view of reality. I can reframe it in that moment. I think that the biggest challenge is that many people are unaware that the fact that they can change that. They don't know that they can change their emotional state. Once you know that you can change your emotional state, now you have a choice. And so is being angry loving to me? Is being angry loving to my body? Is being angry loving to my friend who's going to show up and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm late?
This is related also with forgiveness, no? Because many people say at least to me, no, I can't forgive, no? But if you think in forgiveness as a choice, so I
You can.
choose. You can.
Yes, it's a
you
choice,
can.
yeah.
So, and forgiving, you take away all these bad emotions that are altering yourself, that are making you be stressed and becoming also ill in many things.
Yes.
Also with psychological illness, physiological illness too, because of the stress, because of the whole physiology that is inside the stress. No? But it's a choice that you can. But there also, perhaps, you need to think in some kind of help that comes from outside. I mean, the help of others and the help of something that we in Christian religion call grace of God. So with the grace of God, we can forgive, we can choose to forgive and make a change in our emotions.
And that's where I go back to what I was saying before. Because what you were saying, this, you can choose to have this vanishing point. No? You can choose to give a meaning. This would come, in a way, as well, from the experience past. No? My point was a bit different. My point was, let's start from reality. And the source of problems of many people, all of us at some point, is the focus on the lack of being, the focus on the lack, what there is not.
Yes.
Yes.
And in fact, what I'm trying to settle here is sort of an objective point where from we can all start. This abundance, you're talking about grace as Christians say it, you talk maybe about quantum field, but this infinite abundance, and that is reality. That reality we start from. And so if we train our brain maybe through meditations, through prayers, through reflection, to be ready in situation, to take what there is, see what there is, the infinite abundance to which I participate, to which others participate, and I will participate in a very specific manner. I have qualities. We discussed that a bit earlier today. I have qualities I like in others, that other people will like different qualities in you. But that's also who you are, and you can enact. You can grow your existing qualities. You can enact new qualities, and participate to that abundance. Give it, and you can have the worst day in your life. No, everything may seem to crumble down, right? And indeed, we are all humans, no? And we can make so much meditation. There will be at some point where an emotion, painful, will kick in. Painful emotions are useful, but maybe a displaced painful emotion. But you can always, at that point, look around, and you will look in your surrounding and count at least 5 things you like, at least 5. And then you see your emotions changing. It starts being very cold now. Okay, blue sky, I like it. Yes, I like it. Then you go to the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. And when you reach 10, you're again into an elevated state of emotion. But what does it mean? It means that with the elevated states of emotion, joy, abundance, gratitude, bliss, we are connecting with the objective abundance. And religion would call it God, you would call it quantum field, or whatever people call it.
I wouldn't call it the quantum field. I'd call it something way more than that.
But the reality is that it seems, as I read you, as I hear you, it seems that human being is this formidable, beautiful machine where we have the freedom. We are made for love, and so we have freedom, but it has a condition.
Sure.
It's to access reality, access abundance, and recon it. And by this recognition, put yourself in an elevated emotion state, and then you're connected.
I want to respond to that because for anybody who may be listening to this podcast, they may have had very serious trauma in their life. They may have had a betrayal or a loss or a diagnosis or some type of abuse. And while it seems theoretically very easy
I was talking about training.
Yes. So let's go back to that because there is an overcoming process for the becoming process. There's an unlearning process and a relearning process. There's a breaking a habit of being yourself and then a reinvention of new self, right? So it's unmemorizing emotions that literally are stored in the body and then teaching your body and conditioning your body into a new emotional state. So back to your idea about forgiveness, I 100% agree that the stronger the emotion that we feel from some event in our life, say a trauma, the more altered we are inside of us. That change in our physiological state captures all of the brain's attention, and the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. So then the person remembers the event over and over again after it occurs, and their brain is producing the same chemistry as if the event was occurring. Now the body does not know the difference between the real-life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion by thought alone. To the body's reliving the event 100 times in a day. So now, it's the memory and the emotion, it's the thought and the feeling, it's the stimulus and response that's conditioning the body subconsciously into the past. Now the trauma is not just in the brain. Now the trauma is in the body, because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. So now you say to that person, why are you so bitter? Why are you suffering so much? Why are you in so much pain? And they say, I am this way.
They identify this
because of this event that happened to me 5 years ago. But what they're really saying from a biological perspective is that event changed me, and I have not been able to change since. So then
Change your body.
Right. They tell the story, right, about why they are the way they are. And the latest research in neuroscience says that 50% of that personal account of the past isn't even true. So they're reliving a life that was traumatic that they didn't even have. Okay, so you say to that person, well, forgive. And they say, no, you don't understand. This person did this, I had this experience, and what they're really saying, for the most part, is I can't get beyond my emotional state. Because it's programmed subconsciously. So forgiveness, then, must be earned. Because you have to learn how to continuously come up against that emotional state and say, what would love do? And you say to the person, the only way you're going to create a new future, the only way you're going to make it out of your past is to overcome that emotion. When the person overcomes the emotion, they literally will have their attention off the past. Now, those chemicals that are created from the trauma are highly addictive. And so when the person breaks free from the addiction of that emotion, the liberation of energy from the body is called joy. Now, it's no longer like they have to try to forgive. There's a biological, physiological change that takes place where they release enormous amounts of chemicals that make them feel love. The body's no longer in the past. And when the body's no longer tormented in the past, now it's not like you have to try to forgive. It's just that you see your past from a different level of mind, from a different place. And so then, while it seems theoretically very easy for a lot of people to just change their state in the moment, some people have to really, really practice. They really have to catch themselves getting emotional and catch themselves responding and reacting. And it's the overcoming process. It's the overcoming process. What would love do? Catch myself going unconscious and keep becoming conscious. And that is the work, right?
And I've heard about that specific work, no? That one should identify the triggers. So you're talking about the past, right? And people are stuck in the past. What I read as well is that the brain will, put many traps into your reaction and put you triggers. That is, someone has an accident, frontal accident, car accident, hitting a wall that will be this color. No? Apparently, the brain, each time will be exposed to that color, will react, and by pushing painful emotions, just for the color of the same wall. The person might not be conscious. Why have I this phobia about this wall, no? Or this color, right? And in fact, it's connected to a trauma, as you were saying. And what I've read is that at that point, the person should see well who she or he wants to be in any situation, and then get exposed to the trigger. And the trigger that before would generate an anxiety or an anger or something becomes the occasion to exercise the quality they want to give, to exercise whom they want to be. And at that point, the trigger is still there, but not triggering anymore a disempowered human, triggering anymore the growth of that person. Did you see this in your work?
Yeah, let's use a more practical example.
Yeah.
Let's just say that you have been abused by somebody. This is a greater example of, like, it's not just a color. Mm-hmm. It could be a specific a person or a circumstance. Many people will associate men or associate cars or associate a place with an event, right? So we create beliefs then based on our past experiences, right? So then the work then, the true work then, is to be able to give people the tools, the very specific tools to be able to learn how to regulate their responses. And it may not be easy in the beginning because it's a subconscious mechanism. The body automatically is saying, I don't want to go to that trauma again. So you have to work with the body as the mind and keep practicing and in time.
Through meditation.
Through meditation and also through prayer, through rehearsing in your mind in the next circumstance, in the next situation. I can't respond the same way. And we see this with people that heal themselves and have remissions from diseases. They have great meditations, they sleep better through the night, they have more energy, they have less pain, but their scans and their blood tests still show the disease, okay? 1 hour of a good meditation, 15 hours of the rest of my day being angry and impatient and frustrated and resentful. Okay, now I got to get really good at doing it with my eyes open. Now I got to actually open my eyes and stay conscious, right? So now the game changes. It gets there's always more, right? So then the person who's able to say, God, I really want to truly change my health condition. Let me see, when I see my ex, when I see my coworker, when I'm in traffic, I can't respond and react the same way. Okay, let me learn something about a better way to be. Now, we all do this. You can close your eyes and rehearse in your mind how you're going to be with your coworker, how you're going to be in traffic. And the act of closing your eyes and planning your behavior actually begins to change the brain to look like. Yep. You've already done it. So now you're installing circuitry for you to use. So now if you can get your behaviors to match your intentions, you have a new experience in your environment which changes your emotional state. And that's called evolution, right? Yep. And so that's the process. So whatever you want to call that, sometimes we have to really think about and prepare what we're going to do so that when we get in that circumstance, we have some circuitry in place to use.
Yeah. Doing this, perhaps you are also changing your emotional world in this way. You are also changing in some way the past.
Fully.
Because you give a new meaning for your past, no? And then we turn through this word, no? Meaning. What is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of the thing that happened in my life, in my past life?
What was it for?
What is for? No? So this is very interesting because also foster you in trying to be a better person. A better person to change the world.
Yes.
To change yourself, to change the world. So in order to, where I can find the manual, as you can say, no, in order to be a best person, a better person, a better person in the world. No?
And wouldn't that be found in the silence of meditation? In the sense that we all have a deep desire. No? The etymology of desire is from the Father. Right? And many beliefs say that it's God the Father who created each of us, who wanted each of us. Right? And so this deep desire, I'm not talking about the desire of the next Bentley we will have, or the next beautiful girlfriend we will have, or the next beautiful party we will have, or whatever. I'm talking about the desire of who you want to be, you know? This dream of how you want to live. And probably this is fostered from and gets born inside meditation, inside touching the truth about whom you are and whom you want to give, and receiving it as a gift, and therefore going for it through this access to reality we were discussing before. No, what do you think?
Well, I'll say one thing, if you don't mind. In our studies, in studying people who have had diseases of the mind, of the body, who have had traumatic pasts, when they truly overcome their emotion from the past, when they view their past, they see the purposeful meaning behind it. They say, I had to get diagnosed with that disease.
To see.
I would have never changed. I had to have all of that stuff to finally get to the point where I'm finally in love with life again. I need it all. So if you can't get beyond that emotion, then of course, then you're always going to be anchored in some way to the past. So yes, there has to be a transformation that takes place. Unfortunately, for many people, it takes crisis, it takes diagnosis, it takes disease, it takes loss to finally get serious about their own personal transformation and change, right? So let's demystify, when you say meditation, let's demystify the process, because we don't teach meditation in any traditional sense, not in any traditional religious sense. We just we look at the data. We look at what change looks like. We use meditation to change, right? And so we use it for other reasons also, but a person who's doing the meditations in our work, they're doing their meditations not to heal. They're doing their meditations to change. And when I change, I will heal, right? If I think differently, if I act differently, and I feel differently, of course then my body and my life should change as a result of it. If I think the same way, I act the same way, I feel the same way, my life should stay the same, right? And how you think, how you act, and how you feel is your personality, right? So then, can we be defined by a vision of the future for ourselves instead of the memories of the past? So then, the way we create, for the most part, in terms of seeing a future, is that we have to experience lack. You see something that you don't have and you want it, the moment you desire having it, you're in lack of having it, right? So the brain gets busy imagining, oh, I could have that reality, I could have that future. I think the big challenge is that people wait for that reality, that experience to happen, and when the experience happens, it produces emotion, and the emotion takes away the lack or separation from not having it. But truly, people who are very passionate about creating the life they want are the ones that actually feel the emotion before the event. And when they combine that kind of clear intention, which is a function of the brain, and they're living in that future in their mind in the present moment, they begin to manufacture the very emotions that are connected to that future. And the only way that we can believe in that future is to feel the emotion associated with it. The moment we feel a different emotion, we believe in our past, right? So it sounds really easy, but it takes a little practice. So a function of elevated emotional states is a function of the heart, right? And heart is our very, very important organ. And when the heart starts to open up and we start to feel elevated emotions, our data shows that it actually tells the brain, it says to the brain, the trauma's over. The past is over, and it resets the baseline for the past event, and then the brain gets very creative. Then the brain starts imagining, it starts envisioning, it starts creating. And so we can then, of course, then when we believe in that future, if we're able to sustain that emotional state, we're able to keep that future alive in our mind. And that's what inspires people to keep making the right choices, keep doing the right things, staying away from old emotions, and ultimately they realize their dreams.
This reminds me of something that you speak a lot about. No, it's a very important concept. No, this coherence, no, coherence between your brain and your heart. No, and also remind me that we need coherence also with our own values, with our own project in life. To be coherent is to look after this project always in everything. In everything. And this is also related with the coherence that we need to have between our desires and our appetites that are not the same. So we have inside appetites and desires. When you have coherence between your appetites of your body, of your the instincts, as you want to, if you want to say, and with your desires, you have peace. And in truth, this is the definition of one of the definitions of peace that St. Thomas Aquinas used to say. So the coherence between, or the harmony between your desires and your appetites.
Interesting.
I don't think there's an end to peace. I think there are degrees to peace,
yeah.
right? And so when we look at the body's physiology, when there's brain coherence, and that's when there's an enormous amount of order in the brain, and when there's heart coherence, when the heart is beating in a very healthy state, when we have these two things, the person starts to feel more whole. In other words, when you're whole, it's very difficult to want. How can you want when you feel whole, right? Because if you feel whole, then you feel like everything that you want you already have, right? So
your appetites go down.
So your appetites as well as your desires go down, because there is no desire in wholeness, right? If you feel whole, then you feel like anything that you want you already have. We see in our brain scan work that there's a part of the brain that consumes an enormous amount of energy. It's the brain's predictor. It's always trying to anticipate the next moment. When that system shuts off in a person, the side effect of that is that they're very present.
Very present.
Very present. If a person can get their brain and heart coherent, the effect of that causes them to relax very much into the present moment, fully present, and at the same time awake and aware. So relaxed and awake, or relaxed in the heart and awake in the brain, seems to be that state of equanimity, that state of peace where the person doesn't want anything, doesn't need anything, and they can be a part of the whole. They can be in the present moment.
This access to reality we were talking before, no? With gratitude.
Yeah. From a theoretical standpoint, if you're remembering events from the past and you're feeling emotions from the past, then that is the known. If you're anticipating a future event and you're feeling the emotion, or you're in a habit and you're doing the same thing every single day, that's the known as well, right? So if the familiar past is the known and the predictable future is the known, there's only one place where the unknown can exist, and that's the present moment. Now, the unknown, the way we're wired biologically, is usually signals fear, because it's a threat or a danger. Better to run from the unknown, right? So if a person can relax into the unknown, into the present moment, that's a tremendous amount of peace. Yeah.
Yes. So to live in the present, that is a concept that you use a lot, is very nice and very important. All of us, we need to live in present, and this is peace. But in some way, you live in present for a better future of yourself and of others, because the future is coming, and coming to an end, in some point. So to keep this in mind and to have this in mind will allow you to be a better person, also trying to struggle. Struggle is an interesting concept, because it's related not only with balance. No, you speak a lot about balance, and it's very important to have balance, but it's also related to have harmony. Harmony means also some kind of stress in the chord of an instrument. No, you need to put some strength, some struggle in your life in many different things. And at the end, perhaps with this, in the present moment of love, no, because the present moment of life is love, no, you can achieve the things that allow me to quote again St. Thomas Aquinas, no, the joy, or the perfection of joy that is peace. Peace means also struggle a little in your life, because it's not only balance, but also harmony.
Yeah, but the struggle could become the play of curiosity. If you are not disingenuous with life, you know that pain is part of life. it exists, right? Be it emotional pain or physical pain. And then, if once more you give meaning of not only about the future, but also about whom you can be now, being present in the moment now. And you take things with a grain of playfulness, right? And you don't put your certainty into external events. So the future is not anymore this place of fear, because external events can threaten you. But certainty, you put it in yourself, and for the ones who believe in God, or at least in the abundance and the eternal abundance of the world we live in. Then at that point, the struggle becomes an excitement, becomes pepper. And struggle can be sometimes very dire. You can go through very difficult pains. An emotional pain will become the way to realign to targets, to whom you want to be. The physical pain will become the opportunity to grow and eventually to heal. And so I'm curious also to go now to a big part of your work, that is your physical healing. So we've had now a discussion more about attitudes, and I would like to switch to what's the effect of these attitudes on body, and with a focus on what people call the positive effects, no?
Sure.
on the body. So
Sure.
the idea is, how can you enact with techniques you've discovered a better interior life, and eventually also out of better interior life, change your chemistry in such a manner that your body serves at its best. Right?
Yes. I just want to say one last thing about peace, so I'm at peace with it.
See, peace.
I think when we say we're at peace with something, what we really mean is that we're resolved or we're complete, and we're not trying to control an outcome, that we're resolved on some level. So if your belief in God or some future is very clear in your mind, and you are okay with however it may unfold for you or where you believe you're going, if you're at peace with that, then you're not trying to control or predict or force any outcomes. And I think there's power. There's an enormous amount of stillness and power that goes along with that. So we have been spending quite a bit of time studying people who have been diagnosed with certain health conditions, chronic health conditions, and we've been noticing that when they change the way they think, the way they act, and the way they feel, many times their health conditions, very serious chronic health conditions, disappear. Now, chronic health conditions are created primarily by lifestyle, by choices,
Food.
and by behaviors, right? And there are a lot of factors that influence gene expression, but the number one factor that really produces probably the strongest downregulation of genes, we're back to emotions again. And the emotions that are derived from the hormones of stress on a very long-term effect is what dysregulates or downregulates genes and create disease. Now, many people who are struggling with a health condition will always make the same choice because they're unaware that there are any other things that they can do to help themselves. Chronic health conditions requiring a lifestyle change means you got to know how to change. While pharmaceuticals and vitamins and minerals and diets and exercise and all that stuff is important to regulate health, if you're constantly living in stress and survival, stress is when you're knocked out of homeostasis and balance, right? So the body has an innate capacity to return itself back to order once the stress is gone. But if you keep turning on that stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease, because no organism can live in emergency mode for an extended period of time. When we switch on that fight or flight nervous system, when we perceive a threat or a danger, or we can't control something, or we can't predict something, or we have the perception that something's going to get worse in our life, the alarm system, the emergency system switches on, and it taps an enormous amount of energy from the body. It taps all of the body's resources because you've got to stay alive. And the rush of chemistry that's created from that is a very strong arousal. And the arousal is saying, pay attention to your outer environment, pay attention to your body, pay attention to time. And what we're really saying, and for the most part, is that the body is awakened and aroused to prepare itself for the threat or danger, and it needs energy to do that. Short term, no problem. But if you keep turning it on
5 years.
for 5 years, it makes sense then that the effects are going to begin to break the body down from a cellular level, because the cell will start misbehaving because it doesn't have a chance to recover. Okay, so a person says, okay, well, I've been living in resentment, I've been living in fear, I've been living in suffering.
How do people, because there is one issue with this, I'm sure you've met it as well in your practice as a psychiatrist and doctor. There is one step to be made that it's not always easy for everybody, right? To identify the state in which they're routinely.
Yes.
They think it's normal.
Yes. Well, that's what makes us special as human beings, is that we have a conscience. We have a huge forebrain, a huge frontal lobe, and that's really the seat of us, our ability to be able to pay attention to how we're thinking, to notice how we've been acting, become aware of how we're feeling, and that's what allows us to modify who we are. So it's not that easy, but what we've discovered is if you give people really good information and you combine neuroscience with neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics and neuroplasticity and all the sciences, quantum physics, Newtonian physics, made very simple, and to teach people on some level that they can change, and then set up the conditions in their environment to practice. Okay, the moment they sit down and they close their eyes, if they're used to getting angry in traffic at 8 o'clock every morning because they've been doing that for the last 15 years, and now they're going to sit still and all of a sudden their body's starting to get aroused, that's the time to work with your body and teach them how to settle their body down and to diminish that emotional state. So it takes some practice and it takes some work. So the person has to come up against themselves to some degree, and instead of quitting and giving up on themselves, they have to go a little past that point.
They say, and I have a question for you about this, is they say it takes 21 days to wire a new habit, to neurologically wire a new habit. Is it something you've read somewhere?
I've seen it, but we don't see that at all.
You don't see that? It goes quicker, you say?
No, I don't think that there is a blanket statement that it takes 20. You have people who have trauma, you have people who have better attention spans than others, people are healthier than others, people understand the information better than others, some people do it for 10 minutes, some people do it for an hour. There's way too many variables to define it. Yeah.
Related with this, we have so many different conditions, no? But one very important condition in the medical world is the personality disorder.
What is a personality disorder?
Well, personality disorders are a disease. Nowadays are 10 kinds of personality disorder according to Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. No? Only 10, but probably you have more or less, because also the doctors say, well, we don't really know how many personality disorders are. Because personality, what is personality? Personality is something that belongs to the person, but is very close to the person itself, so to the I, to myself. It's not the same. It's not the same personality and person. So person is different. Person is, you are the person and you have a personality. But for changing your personality, it's not so easy.
And by the way, it is demonstrated that whatever person you address yourself to, each time you will have a different personality. There will be nuances. So the brain adapts so well that indeed you are a person, and you will show up with different set of qualities and trait of personalities depending on the circumstance and depending on the person you're with. And so that's why I'm curious about what is that personality disorder trait, because
personality is something that very root in your person. There's a motto in the field of personality disorder that is like this, no? When you understand more or less, when you understand how to change, you are already changing. So the first step for changing yourself, for change your personality, is to understand where the problem is. So understand is beginning to change, and to change is beginning to understand. This is the motto. So it's something very related, and it's close to what you say before. No? So to understand, to make a work with you, to understand yourself in order to transform yourself, to transform also your physiology in some way.
What you say is one person wants to change, the reaction of the environment, the reaction of their own body are enough as triggers to initiate a change. Even if because where I'm heading to now is how you define the general direction in which you want to go, right? And where do you find the resource to do that? Say a person who comes and arrives to you and said, I'm lost, I've heard of you, looks cool, I've read one book, start seeing the effect. I don't know where to orient myself, how to redefine myself, if you wish. How does the process with you work?
Well, we run large events around the world where people can retreat from their lives to disconnect from the people they know and the things they own and the places they go.
Interrupt the pattern.
And to retreat enough so that they can learn information and to learn knowledge. And I think knowledge allows us to become aware of what we were once unaware of. If people don't know that they can change their health or don't know that they can change their life in some way, then they'll always make the same choice. So you get a group of people together, you give them the right information. It's a study, it's an understanding, it's your ability to be able to see some aspect of yourself from outside of your life, right? Give them 7 days to begin to integrate that information and then teach them how to do something with that. It's not about their health. It's not about their wealth. It's not about their job. It's who they become, right? Yeah. It's who they become, right? So the overcoming process of the 95% of who we are that's subconsciously programmed is the work, right? That is the work. So getting beyond, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change, this will take too long, something's wrong with me, it's my mother's fault, it's my father's fault. If I want to be happy, I can't complain, I can't blame, I can't make excuses, I can't feel sorry for myself. If I really want to be abundant, I can't feel lack, I can't feel unworthy. If I really want to be healthy, I can't feel anger, I have to feel whole, I have to feel gratitude. Okay, now that I understand what I'm doing to myself in this whole person.
So you're almost like doing an exercise of neuroanthropology that is explaining how human being works. You give them a toolkit, and then from there, activating the toolkit, as you say, the change starts initiating a new perception.
But here's the advantage right now. What makes it so unique is that we have amazing research to show that you can change in 7 days. Not just a little bit of research. We got with the largest database in the world right now that says that you can change and you can heal. Okay? Along with that evidence, we have great testimony in human beings that have healed from all kinds of different health conditions, very serious health conditions. And to me, that's the 4-minute mile. That's somebody breaking through some level of consciousness or unconsciousness that, they said the 4-minute mile was impossible physiologically to break until somebody did it. And then after that, somebody did it 2 weeks later, and there's been 1,800 people or so that have broken the 4-minute mile since then. So that person who heals from cancer, that person who heals from MS, that person who heals from a chronic health condition, they stand on the stage and they tell their story. They tell their story of how they healed. They're telling the truth. They're the example of truth. They're saying, this is what I did. And they don't look like a movie star. They don't look young. They don't look buffed. They don't, they're not particularly dressed well. They're just a person. Yeah. But everybody in the audience is listening to them because it is the truth. And it's unbelievable. And now, somebody in the audience who has a similar health condition is looking at that person and saying, me too. If she did that, I can do that too. So now, the consciousness is awareness. People become aware that there's a possibility that they could actually heal their health condition. And their belief become strengthened in their abilities.
Sort of automatically break this empowering pattern, and that raises the curiosity on what can happen. No?
Yes, of course.
See, it's the openness to the unknown, as
Yes,
you say,
yes.
but it's also the openness, in some way, if you allow me, to the mystery. Yeah? So the man, the woman, so the human being are a mystery in many things, but not too mysterious as many people think. This is the job that you are doing. So trying to go deeper in things that it seems is always a mystery. Not always is a mystery. There are many things that looks like a mystery and are not a mystery.
Yeah, exactly.
But we are going in our life perhaps for the encounter with a big mystery.
Yes.
So the mystery of the end of our life, the meaning of our life. Because one of the people that you heal, or the people that you heal, after they felt healed, they need to look after the meaning of their life and the meaning of their healings too.
Yes,
so
of
it's
course.
the way don't stop there.
Exactly.
So you are speaking from the scientific point of view, and very exciting and very impressive, no? But also it's interesting to think in ourselves as a whole, but our whole that will not be complete up to the end in some way. So openness to the
Radical abundance.
unknown and to the mystery,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And for me personally, in witnessing some of the things that I've seen in people's accounts of their own healing, to me it's unbelievable. Like it's a mystery in and of itself. Like we just did an event just this past week, and I understood on such a deep level that the human body has the capacity to regenerate itself completely at any age, given the right information. I witnessed somebody on the stage literally regenerate their body. Now, it sounds nice theoretically, but when you see the person tell the story, and there's a part of their body that's missing, and now it's back, that's unbelievable for me. That is stretching my belief. To me, that mystery is very exciting. Like,
Yes.
I want to know how that happened. How is that possible?
But the how, somehow you are discovering it. So you are discovering the method. Right?
Yes, yes.
To how is you are measuring when it happened as it happens.
Well, look, once is an incident, twice is a coincidence. 3, 4, 10, 20, 30, 40 times, there's some law, there's anything that's repeatable is science, right? So we're seeing that it's repeatable, right? So that's the exciting part about it. That means that on some level there's some principles and laws that can be demystified so that people have within their reach the tools to begin to influence their own health to a greater degree. And so then the person who gets a diagnosis and there's a prognosis that says what's normal is you're going to have to live with this condition, or you're too old, at your age it probably won't go away. The person who really is serious has to overcome that prognosis, overcome that belief that they're too old. There's a journey that they must make. A long journey that they must make to keep that belief alive in their mind, to feel the emotion that's associated with that future, so they can believe in it, right? So, and some people, when the chemo isn't working, and the radiation isn't working, and the surgeries didn't work, and the drug trials didn't work, and the diet didn't work, and the vitamins didn't work, and nothing worked. Nothing changes in our life until we change. So that if the person says, okay, if I change, maybe my health will change. Because they're only left with one thing at that point. Their belief in themselves and a belief in some unknown, some greater power, the belief in possibility, right? So that's the reason why the person gets up and does the work. They could, if they don't practice change, then they don't believe it's possible. If they truly get up and do the work, then they're saying, I'm showing up because I believe it's possible. Keep showing up. Sooner or later, you start to become that belief.
What I'm impressed by what you're saying now is we are still in the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, at the heart of the Catholic Church, which is the Vatican, a church that's been created 2,000 years ago, who was telling his disciples with faith. So you've been talking about belief, no? And faith is an absolute certainty. It's seeing something that is unseen as if it was real. Right? You could do any of the miracles I'm doing, as if he was describing all human nature, no? And it seems that the work you're doing is basically laying the path to simply obey what he was telling us, like living humanly fully. The target probably, and as he did, correct me if I'm wrong, you'd know that better than me, that when he was healing people, he did it out of mercy, out of wanting daily to help his friends, no? But also, I think the target was the inner world, the inner health. And it's very similar to what you're saying. What you're saying is people change from inside, access abundance, access elevated emotions, meditate, and as a by-side product, they get a better health. No? And it's impressive to see that maybe we're at the beginning of new fundamental discoveries where all Western medicine is about take something external, take some substance, take a scalpel, and you will feel better. Right? To a new beginning of medicine where all these techniques can still exist and still have their validity, but would be grounded in whom we are, whom we want to be, no? Mm-hmm. and then have positive impact on health.
Yes. From the past, medicine is defined as a way of to have a healthy life, so to cure someone, as in Latin said, in herbis, verbis, and lapidibus, et lapidibus, as you remember. No? So in words, the words are very important in medicine forever. Words. So words are an instrument for heal someone from the very past. No? Herbis, so all the things that came from nature, and lapidibus means minerals, so minerals. No? So, and it's true, so there are many different dimensions in ourselves,
of medicine,
in medicine and in the human being. Viktor Frankl, that we spoke a little about him, used to say that mainly German psychologists, that the human being are dimensionals. No? So dimensional means all of us have a body, so physiological aspects, then psychological aspects that are different, grounded in physiology, and spiritual dimension. And a spiritual dimension is not only in belief or not in God, or some kind of problem with guilty feelings or things like this related with your conscious, but the spiritual dimension is more deeper. Is the relationship with others and the capacity of seeking or yearning or longing for the meaning of your life. No? And also is the possibility of all the things or many of the things that you are discovering. No? So we are dimensional, and you speak a lot about dimensions. No? And for this is very interesting. It's very well related, I think.
Well related, yeah.
Very well related.
I'd like to conclude the podcast now with a little story. And I know this person, I know him quite well. He's skiing, it's in April, end of the season. Snow is a bit heavier, and he's skiing with his brother. He runs fast, flips, breaks his neck. First radio shows 3 cracks. Second radio shows 3 cracks clearly. They call the helicopter, but at that moment, he knows he's going to be operated. And he has to be there with his daughter, who is 6 years old. He knows the daughter might end up alone and might be afraid because the mother is not there. At that moment, he said, okay, whatever is going to come, I accept it. Starts using your methods. Breathing, visioning, and so on. start using not your doctor's method, but your priest's method, also is rosary. So that unites. It's brought, the helicopter brings a very famous surgeon there. The surgeon looks at the radios, and the person asks, okay, what's the verdict? And say, look, you have a very complex operation in a few moments. We are getting everything ready. There is 50% probability that you won't survive the operation. 40% probability remaining you'll be in a wheelchair the whole life. And 10% the remaining, for sure, you'll be minimum 9 to 12 months hospital. And that person answered very quietly and very serenely. He said, no, I want to be there for my daughter. I'm loving my daughter and I will be back tonight. And the doctor said, absolutely not. Look at the radios. We have here 2 radios that show the same thing. Right? You need to be operated. And the doctor even asked an alcohol test to the other persons who are there because they think the person is drunk. He's flown into the place where he is going to be operated. In the helicopter, keeps doing his meditation. You know. The person was conscious. Right? Keep doing this meditation. Keeps praying rosary at the same time. And visualize a good dinner the same evening with the person, elevated emotions, and lets it go in the hands of God, in the hands of Our Lady, using your exact methods. So your words were into action at that very place. They arrive at the airport, they're running, rushing the person into the surgeon, and they make a last radio to guide the surgeons. Some people gather, personal gathers and so on, they start, there is a chatter, and then doctors make another radio. And they come and they say, look, there is something we don't understand. The cracks are open here on these radios. On the new radios, there is still a trace of the cracks, but they are perfectly closed. We have made 2 times the radios, we are sure it's closed, you have nothing, we don't have to operate you. But you have to stay 2 days. And the person goes, okay, no, I'm going tonight, as I told you. What happens if I go tonight? Do I have a risk? No, you have 0 risk, you have nothing anymore. And it's impressive indeed how what you're discovering, all the work you're doing, no? That is what maybe you'd call proto-evangelical, can help people, can empower people. And this young daughter who was panicked when saw the father arriving was so happy, you see. Your work contributes behind much more than what you think I could do. And so I'm really grateful for the moment we had here. Thank you, Father, that you came. Your participation to welcoming Joe Dispenza here in Rome was of great help. You're a great specialist of Viktor Frankl. You're a doctor, so having all these perspectives around the table is a great moment. I hope this is only the first of a long series, and we will study with you how we can expand and go beyond what you see, because as the story that I just told you, there are many things you do that you don't see. And thank you for these as well.
Thank you so much.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.